People who have an Asian fetish just announce it proudly and they kind of brag about it to you almost like, oh yeah, I've dated so many Asian women, as if that's good for me. What is the difference between a fetish and a preference? And there is a difference. I think the fetishes treat the women as they have the stereotypical beliefs, first of all, but they also treat Asian women as interchangeable. Oh, I'll just change her in for a new one, kind of thing. And I think that someone who maybe happened to fall in love with an Asian woman or just happened to date more than one truly respects them individually as a person and is not a fetishist is a big difference. I'm Kaila Yu, and I am an author, and my new book is coming out, or it might be out by the time this podcast has dropped, on August 19th. It's about my experiences with the fetishization of Asian women, and also goes over some of the media I grew up with that was really influential on me.
Kyla, so would you tell us about, your inspiration, your background, like why'd you write this book?
The book was totally accidental. I had no intention of writing a memoir or really even a book. I just pivoted after I pursued a music career to do travel writing. And I was working in that career when the pandemic happened. And then I could no longer write or travel. So then I kind of pivoted to writing about culture, which included mostly TikTok during the pandemic. And I also started posting myself on TikTok. And the TikToks that started to go viral for me were the ones talking about my life in the 2000s as an Asian American. So I just really leaned into that nostalgic content. And I was just having a lot of fun posting that. And then the Asian spa shootings happened, which basically a sex addicted white man went and shot 8 people at a massage parlor, and 6 of them were Asian women. We were also dealing with a ton of Asian hate during the pandemic, so this was a very top of mind topic already. And then at that point, I really reflected on how I might have contributed to the Asian fetish unconsciously, but that kind of ended up inspiring the book.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about here, even just like your intro, right? About culture and identity. And in the midst of pandemic, we're just kind of starting up the pandemic, right? We completely understand at the Yellow Chair Collective, that's kind of how we grew our practice as well, was all the anti-Asian hate crime and our identity as Asian Americans. What does that mean to be in this state of being when we are being attacked? And especially being women as well, who are often very much the caretakers of the household, right? A lot of the immigrant daughters have responded to us on the contents that we were also creating about mental health care for the Asian American community. And so I think everything aligned so well with everything that was happening for you in your life, as well as the thoughts that you were going through as well.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So why is this conversation around fetishization so important?
I think it's important because people don't think it's a big deal. The people who have an Asian fetish just announce it proudly and they kind of brag about it to you almost like, oh yeah, I've dated so many Asian women, as if that's like good for me,
It's like a trophy even,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's very
world.
much. Like what I talk about in my book, because a big question on top of mind for the men is what is the difference between a fetish and a preference? And there is a difference. I think the fetishes treat the women as, they have the stereotypical beliefs, first of all, but they also treat Asian women as interchangeable. Oh, I'll just change her in for a new one, kind of thing. And I think that someone who maybe happened to fall in love with an Asian woman or just happened to date more than one or whatever, but, truly respects them individually as a person and is not a fetishist, is a big difference.
makes me think about like Love is Blind, you know, and like if you're entering into this relationship blindly without knowing their race at all or ethnicity, the color of their skin, would you still fall in love with this person as an individual, their personality and everything that comes with them? And of course, culture plays a lot of part into their personality perhaps too, but that I think there's a separation between that and like just looking at somebody visually and then sexualizing them for the race or the color of their skin.
And that isn't like a strictly Asian thing. Like there are some men that objectify women, as in, oh, I'll trade her in for a younger one, next one. So yeah, it's a universal problem, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that there's been some media influence in the ways that we are talking about the culture of fetishizing Asian women?
It's less now, I would say, still present, but growing up, it was so intense. I feel like the media that influenced me growing up that I loved was Memoirs of a Geisha, first the book and then the movie, very fetishy. And the Harajuku girls, very different, but also fetishy in their own way. They were like her ornamental objects. And the Fast and Furious series, where Asian women were mostly used as decorations also, even though Asian women are quite involved in the community that inspired the movie. Yeah, there's many things,
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're going back all the way to the beginning of your intro, how you started off by creating content right on TikTok about the culture of 2000s. And I know that we have had so much media influence from the 2000s, the movies, the shows, and how we were seen as Asian Americans just in general in this, you know, movie world, the Hollywood world, but specifically like Asian women too.
Yeah, Asian women were very much seen as the typical tropes were China doll, which includes geisha, or dragon lady, basically.
It like bled into from the 90s when it kind of began, right, representing Asian women in this way in the movies. And then it bled into the 2000s where we were really identified as just like those pretty dolls in the scenes.
Yeah, and I kind of go back into history. It goes back even farther to the early 19th century because Madame Butterfly or Madame Chrysanthemum is a book that inspired Madame Butterfly, which is one of the biggest musicals in the world, which was about a soldier, American soldier, going and like finding an underage wife and then disposing of her when he returns to America. And then they repeat that in Miss Saigon, except it's in Vietnam, you know, interchangeable again. And then I think they do it in China with Anna May Wong's movie. The name is escaping me, but it's the exact same premise, except it's with a Chinese girl in a movie.
Yeah. So before even, you know, movies, television, that was even a thing. The way that Asian women were viewed has always been a little bit on an exotic level.
Very much exotic, yeah.
Yeah. So again, going back to your book then, tell us about like the content of the book. So what can we expect from the book and what's the storyline, if there is any? What should the readers be expecting?
Yeah, it's a memoir and essay. So each essay kind of deals with a different topic. Like there's a Memoirs of a Geisha chapter where I analyze both the book and the movie and the effects that it had on Asian women, but I also kind of pair it with what I was going through at the time that it came out. I go over Joy Luck Club in another chapter, Fast and Furious and the import scene. And I even cover the ABG trope, which is the Asian baby girl, which Asian Americans created that trope, but it still ended up being sexy and like, the Asian girl's sexy again.
Yeah, I grew up in the LA area. So I grew up in Koreatown, LA, but obviously or have a lot of exposure to the ABGs, right?
Yeah.
That was such a big culture in, especially where the Asian Americans are, like you mentioned, it's almost created by Asian American culture. But then it makes it so that it's feeding into what the Western society and culture was feeding, the narrative around who or what Asian Americans should look like.
And then the Asian girls were leaning into sexier clothing because that was what we were taught in the 2000s, like post-feminism, that, oh, sexuality is empowering.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to say about that, I feel like.
Yeah,
right?
I don't agree with that, yeah. But
yeah,
yes,
even
we were
still,
taught that.
Yeah. Is fetishism and women, even sometimes, right, girls that are sold into this narrative, how is that a problem for our society?
I think it's a problem. I mean, and for me specifically, because it's really damaging to your self-esteem to view yourself as an object, as merely an object, and to be treated as one. So it makes you, it diminishes you. It hurts your self-esteem. I think it's damaging in so many ways.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any personal stories of your own that you can share about the ways in which this culture has impacted you and your identity?
Yeah, I would say, so I grew up in coming of age in the 2000s. There was a mix of like the fetishization of Asian women looking petite and demure, and yet there was like the all-American Pamela Andersons and the Maxim and the Playboy being really, really huge. Girls Next Door, the Playboy show was on television as a friendly family show. And that's like since been revealed that he was very much a predator and that he was abusive to the women. It's not surprising, but we all viewed it as kind of, it was presented wholesome in a way. But anyways, so with the mix of that and then me thinking I had to be like fitting to the Asian stereotypes to be noticed, and then also needing to be sexy to be noticed, I myself ended up getting breast implants, which I don't regret at all. But I also know that if there were maybe more different representations of different women's bodies at the time, maybe I would have made a different choice. I don't know. And I don't regret the decision per se, but you don't know what like influences your decisions. And like all physical attractiveness is a construct, right? It's what we decide is attractive at the moment.
Especially looking at throughout history, right? What was quote unquote attractive through different eras of history. We look at it and we're like, really? That's interesting.
I mean, even during this recent era, like all of a sudden, it's really important to have a huge butt, which I was very sad about because Asians do not have huge butts. So, but that was not the case. Like Paris Hilton or Pamela Anderson, that really skinny look was what was in during the 2000s. So it's changed drastically in just 10 years.
Yeah. And, just kind of like looking at the different historical elements, what do you think are some influences that are making these beauty standards?
They're all patriarchal beauty standards, first of all. But I think, with bigger breasts, it's like a sign of fertility, I believe. I've read. That would be where possibly that originates. And I guess just for Asian women being more petite and that being a desirable trait, that just may be related to how we like men who are 6'3". It's like genetic, like it seems big and they're the protector, and that would have mattered in a time where physicality, I mean, it doesn't matter now. It's like, what are they protecting us from? But like back when we were in the caveman era or something.
Yeah, yeah. So there's some things that feel almost intrinsic, right, to survival that we're attracted to. Yeah. But then now that we're not in that survival mode, even yet that there are some physical attractions that still occur anyways out of survival.
And I feel like the Asian traits that are mentioned as desirable, like being small and tiny, are related to submissiveness. So that kind of plays along to that.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I remember, I don't know how old I was. I think I was a kid when I first heard about the Chinese women long ago when their feet were bounded,
Oh my God,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, the shape of their foot or that so that they don't run away. Also, that submissiveness, right, is so important, and it really represented that physically by bounding their feet. But it became like a beauty standard as well.
I do say, like, one day we may look back 50 years from now and be like, oh, I can't believe people wore stiletto heels. Like, they were so painful. And, like, what a restrictive beauty standard. But I don't think it looks good right now.
It's true. And like the long lashes, right?
Yeah, all of it. Yeah. But it is like disturbing. I do go into the history of like, yes, the Asian fetish is regarded as westernized, but the submissiveness of Asian women is from the Asian patriarchy. And they were really violent and harsh with the women. I think that was kind of evident in the Joy Luck Club. And like back during that time, the Asian women had to obey three obediences. It was first your father, then your husband, and then you had to be obedient to your son. So it was like, yeah. So always below the man.
Absolutely. Like you mentioned, even like the third category, right? As a mother, to imagine that you are supposed to be obedient to the son that you gave birth to.
Yes, yeah, it's absurd. I'm glad we don't think that way
absolutely.
today. Yeah.
I am curious to hear more about your personal journey and your story as well. Would you like to share with us anything about anything that you remember from growing up? Any of the stories that really identified you?
Yeah, I feel like growing up, I was pretty nerdy. I was like the typical model minority kid, and I was extremely shy. And I didn't like being that way. It was just how I was. It's hard to break out of being shy when you're shy, you know.
Yeah.
It's like you're so fearful. And then my parents were my mom was a typical strict parent. I was actually, and I write this in the book, I was quite submissive and obedient until I got to about 15 years of age. And then I met this really bad Asian girl at my school. And she was beautiful.
Quote unquote bad girl.
Yeah, she was bad, but very beautiful. And I was very impressed by her, and she took me under her wing. And then I became bad and rebellious. But then I felt empowered because even though I grew up in Upland, California, and we only have a like 3% Asian population back then, the Asians as a collective weren't nerdy. They were like kind of badass. They smoked, they drove their import cars, they like would give attitude. I remember this time back when Watching was around, which is like an Asian gang, like one of them came down to Upland and like shot a white guy for like giving him attitude. He didn't kill him, but like he shot at him. But like that's not what you typically expect from an Asian, right? Asians
Right.
shy and scared. The stereotypes back then. So then I felt proud to be part of these like badass Asians.
Yeah.
So then I became really Asian pride for a while, for like probably 15 years, where I only hung around Asians.
Yeah. So I feel like I hear this a lot for a lot of our community members as well, where, the stereotypical, like we've been taught a certain narrative and story, and so we live out those in our childhood until we see the opposite of that and we're influenced by the opposite. And we get very attracted to the opposite of like breaking out of the shell, especially when into our teenage and college years, young adult years, when our identities are supposed to be formed. And we've been so submissive. We've been hiding a part of ourselves for so long. And a lot of our culture and narratives have been telling us that because we're Asian, because we're women, because we're immigrants, you know, X, Y, and Z. And that puts us into this box to be shy, to not speak up, to not rock the boat. And then we see people that are breaking out of those shells, and we really want to pursue in exploring what it's like to live outside of that. And some people do and some people don't, right?
Yeah,
but the question still stays, like, what is life like to be really me, truly me? And are we given that opportunity at all?
Yeah, more kids should be given that opportunity to find themselves.
Absolutely. And I feel like even still, perhaps like women and young girls have a lot more barrier than because of the gender stereotype, right? Versus a young boy to have that opportunity to find their own identity and true narrative of self.
I mean, I feel glad that I did not grow up right now where you had to have Instagram like in high school, and then the worry about like boys trying to get you to send them nudes. Like, can you imagine you're like a 12-year-old girl and you're just trying to impress a boy? It may not be that hard for him to like, you're so young and impressionable. Like, I'm so glad I didn't have to deal with those minefields growing up.
Absolutely. It's like when we were growing up, there was too narrow of the narratives and stories and movies where we were, you know, receiving our information about our identity. But now there's too much, and that's also having another effect as well, where they're constantly being fed different messages about their identity there, and they can't figure out who they are.
Yeah, I guess there's always something for a generation to deal with either way.
Absolutely. So I wanted to jump into, we are talking about you and your story, your upbringing, and you've mentioned about your sobriety. And so tell us a little bit more about that journey. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, I kind of cover real deeply in the book about my drug addiction. During college, I was like assaulted, and that kind of sent me down a spiral of, well, that was happening during like the rave scene where all the Asians are suddenly going to raves. So I really fell into that a little deeper than most. And then I was in a band, and then everybody there was doing drugs. So it was all very normalized with whoever I was with. And eventually, I had to get sober because I was miserable, and I was just trying to fix my life by trying to do all these self-help books and whatever. But the answer was, and eventually, I had to get sober because I was miserable, and I was just trying to fix my life by trying to do all these self-help books and whatever. But the answer was that I needed to get sober. So yeah, I ended up finding like 12-step programs and other sources. And I think the only reason I'm able to reflect back on some of the things that have happened to me is because I was sober. Because before everything was just chaos and like, why is this happening to me kind of thing.
Yeah. Was there any kind of turning point that where it made you realize like, I really have to stop, or I have to get better?
I think it was just getting older. I mean, it's all cute when you're doing drugs in your 20s and whatever, nobody cares. But once you start getting into your 30s, it's, oh, this is kind of sad. So I started to get that. And then eventually, I think I was pursuing music and it just wasn't working out. Yeah, there wasn't like a specific turning point, but like I had actually been trying to get sober for a couple years before it finally clicked.
I see. Yeah. I'm curious, you had mentioned you were in a band, and, it sounds like you were very tapped into being an artist when you were young, and now you're an author. It's another type of, artistry as well. And so tell us about your, creative journey as well and what that means to you.
It was all very accidental also. The only one thing that was very intentional was that when I was young, there were very few role models. And so my role model was Sung-hee Lee, who was a Playboy model. So that I was like, oh, to be beautiful and sexy, I should be like her because I really think she's so beautiful. She's like the most beautiful Asian woman I've ever seen in my life. So that was the one thing I pursued with intent. But after I was done doing pinup modeling, I always liked to sing, so I ended up pursuing that. But later, after getting sober, I discovered that I was just trying to prove, like, oh, I'm more than just a pinup model. I have some talent. Like, it was a validation thing. And I didn't even enjoy touring as a band that much or performing live. I just really like to shoot music videos, honestly. But yeah. I discovered that, and I loved being a singer. Like, I loved the idea of it, but I didn't actually love performing. And that was a lot of my choices. I would choose things to, like, oh, I need to prove this, or like, I need to show them this. The writing career happened by accident, and that I think was so organic and wasn't chosen for validation reasons. It was just after the band ended, I had no backup plan. So my guitarist and I, who also she had no backup plan, we were just brainstorming things to do, and we decided to turn our band's website into a travel blog because it already had traffic and we already posted touring. So it's, and then that eventually led me to actual journalism, which I really enjoy doing now.
Wow, that's incredible. And so, you've just kind of allowed life to happen for you, and you've been on this journey. And,
some
part
of it's
of
happened to me.
Yeah.
Some of it happened to me, yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of, sometimes discovering new things, especially creative work, is that you allow things to happen to you in life, and then, you discover what that leads to as well. On the underline of what you were talking about, especially, your discovery as a young individual woman in the band and talking about beauty standards and all of these things, I can't help but ask about how this is all related to our self-worth, right? And self-value. Because I think even when you were talking about the questions of like, you're trying to perform for who, for what? And so I'm curious to hear about your thoughts on how all of this relates to our self-worth.
Well, I mean, I think the whole crux of my book is when I was young, I had very little self-worth. I wasn't, like Asian parents love you unconditionally, but they don't teach you about self-worth really. And we're learning now, like, it's so important for fathers to validate their daughters and tell them they're beautiful and loved. Like, my dad didn't do that. He didn't know. He wasn't taught that by his parents, even though he was a wonderful father in every other way. But I, being a person who really, probably my love language is verbal affirmation as one of them, I really, really needed that. So since getting sober, it's been a whole journey of trying to have more self-worth, which I think I have so much more now, but I think that's like a lifelong journey. And then when that gets into therapy, is I am working with a therapist, and she kind of leans into IFS therapy, which is like internal family systems, and we're like separating out my parts and doing all the cheesy inner child stuff, but it kind of helps. Yeah.
So cheesy, but it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like nurturing, you looking back at yourself, your childhood self, and all the love that you may or may not have received or recognized or acknowledged in the moment, but you're able to give that to yourself now as an adult.
Yeah, it's like reparenting. And then also my therapist, like I've been recently reading Mother Hunger, which is like, again, my mother was an amazing mother in many ways, but she didn't compliment me or like tell me I was, Asian parents don't compliment you. They criticize you to get you to be better. Yeah. So then I'm discovering aspects of how that may have influenced me. So yeah, it's a lot of reflection.
And that I'm wondering how all of this is bringing you more self-worth.
I think just the awareness, because it's like I think part of the IFS is like, oh, just knowing you have a part that is the protector that you can speak to. Like, for example, the other day, I was like kind of mad at somebody for something. And it's a bit of a resentment that I haven't been able to let go. And I was like playing the tape again of being mad at this person. And then me and my therapist recently identified the protector. And then I could go to the protector and say, hey, you've been doing such an amazing job protecting me. Like, oh my God, you've done like so much protection for all the difficulty I've had in the past. Like, why don't you take a rest now? Like, go hang out. We're like really fine to take it from here. And just like, because usually without learning IFS, I'd be like, stop thinking this, you know, like trying to forcefully stop myself to stop. And that's like apparently not how like the parts resist you more when you resist them, I guess.
Yeah. You know, I feel like this ties back into our beginning of the conversation about suppression, right? We suppress so much of ourselves, so many of our identities. And when you talk about the parts, you know, we're trying to distinguish all of the ways, all of the different parts and all the experiences that have combined us into suppressing and to not react, right? But we're discovering and acknowledging that those parts do exist and that they are of value too. And so then holistically, we ourselves carry so much value.
Yeah, it was surprisingly healing so far.
I am really glad to hear that you've been on this really amazing healing journey for yourself and identity and self-discovery. And I know that you share all of these stories and experiences in your new book that's about to release. Tell us about, you know, going back to your book, what would you like for the readers to get out of your book?
I just think there's like a lot of history about the fetishization of Asian women that people aren't aware about it, like the American military history or how it dates back to the 1800s. And like, I think that would give them some color and nuance to see why it's harmful. And there's also like such a vocal group of like, when I say Asian fetish, they're like, but you have a white fetish. I don't only date white guys, so that's not true, first of all. But like, they are accusing any Asian woman who dates a white guy of having a white fetish. And that's like simply not a thing, because I don't think Asian women generally, or women generally, sexualize, objectify, and dispose of men as a small subset of men do. I don't want to demonize all men, because I love men and there's lots of great men, but there are a lot of vocal men who would maybe benefit from reading the book to learn.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing from you is that this book is not just made for women, but it's made for everyone to be able to better understand just our gender history, really, right?
And also, if you're just nostalgic, it is kind of a nostalgic run through the 2000s and like the import cars, you know, like what Asian Americans were growing up with during that time. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, so where can we find out more about your work and how can we support your book?
Everything's under my name, Kaila Yu, so my website, my social media. The book will be available on all major bookstores, so you can find it in store or online on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever.
Amazing. Well, is there anything else that you would like to tell the audience today before we say our goodbyes?
Yeah, I would just love to hear from you if anything resonates. And I love having discussions about just sharing more about what I have learned through my research of Asian fetishism.
Thank you for listening for Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast. If you have found any value from this show, please follow us at Yellow Chair Collective on Instagram and go on our website, yellowchaircollective.com, if you would like our services.